The black guy was from Oceanside, California, or at least he had been born there and had later grown up in Los Angeles. And his name was Omar Abdul. He worked as Merolino's sparring partner, and he told Fate he was thinking of staying in Mexico to live for a while. What what will what do what y- what will you do after the fight? Asked Fate. Get along as best I can, said Omar. Like we do, right? Where will you get the money? Anywhere, said Omar. This country is cheap. Every few minutes, for no reason, Omar will smile. He had a nice smile. He set off with a goatee and a fancy little mustache. But every few minutes he will scowl too. And then the goatee and the little mustache took a menacing look, a look of supreme and ominous indifference. When Fate asked whether he was a professional or had been in any matches, he answered that he'd fought, without deigning to explain further. When Fate asked him about Merolino Fernandez's chances of winning, he said you never knew until the bell. As the fighters dressed, Fate took a stroll around the courtyard and surveyed his surroundings. What you looking at? Omar Abdul said to him. The landscape, he said. Is one sad landscape. Next to him, the fighter scanned the horizon, and then he said, that's just how it is here. It's always sad at this time of day. It's a goddamn landscape for women. It's getting dark, said Fate. There's still light enough to spar, said Omar Abdul. What do you do at night when you are done training? All of us? Asked Omar Abdul. Yeah, the whole team or whatever you call it. We eat, we watch TV, then Mr. Lopez goes to bed and Merolino goes to bed, and the rest of us can go to bed too, or watch more TV, or head over into town. If you know what I'm saying, he said with a smile that might have meant anything. How old are you? Fate asked suddenly. 22, said Omar Abdul. When Merolino climbed into the ring, the sun was sinking in the west, and the trainer turning on the lights, which were fed by an independent generator that supplied the house with electricity. In a corner, Garcia stood motionless, with the head bowed. He has changed and put on knee-length black boxing shorts. He seemed to be asleep. Only when the lights came on did he raise his head and look at Lopez for a few seconds, as if waiting for a signal. One of the reporters, who never stopped smiling, rang the bell, and Garcia assumed a defensive stance and moved into the center of the ring. Merolino was wearing a safety helmet, and he circled Garcia, who threw a couple of left jabs, no more, trying to land a hit or two. Fate asked one of the reporters whether sparring partners usually wore safety helmets. Usually, said the reporter. So why isn't he wearing one? Asked Fate. Because no matter how much anybody hits him, they won't do any damage, said the reporter. Do you see what I mean? He doesn't feel anything. He's out of it. In the third round, Garcia left the ring and Omar Abdul stepped up. The kid was bare-chested, but he hadn't taken off his worn-up pants. His movements were much quicker than those of the Mexican fighter, and he dodged away easily when Merolino tried to corner him. Although it was clear that the fighter and his sparring partner had no intention of hurting each other. Every so often they will walk while still moving and laugh. You off in Costa Rica? Omar Abdul asked him. Come on, baby, open your eyes. Fate asked the reporter what the fighter was saying. Nothing, nothing, said the reporter. All the son of a bitch knows are curse words. After 3 rounds, the trainer stopped the fight and disappeared into the house, followed by Merolino. The masseur is waiting for them, said the reporter. Who is the masseur? asked Fate. We haven't seen him. I think he never comes out into the yard. He is a blind guy. A blind guy. You know, he was born blind, and he spends all day in the kitchen eating, or in the bathroom shitting, or lying on the floor, or in his room reading books for blind people, in that blind people's language. What is called? Braille, said the other reporter. Fate imagined the masseur reading in a dark room, and a shudder passed through him. It must be something like happiness, he thought. And he watering through, Garcia dumped a bucket of cold water on Omar Abdul's back. The fighter from California winked at Fate. What do you think? He asked. Not bad, said Fate to be nice. But I get the feeling Pickett's in better condition. Pickett's a punk, said Omar Abdul. Do you know him? I've seen him fight on TV a couple of times. Motherfucker doesn't know how to move. Well, I guess I've never actually seen him, said Fate. Omar Abdul stared at him in astonishment. You've never seen Pickett fight? He asked. No, the truth is, the boxing guy at my magazine died last week, and since we didn't have anyone else, they sent me. Put your money on Merolino, said Omar Abdul after a moment of silence. Good luck, said Fate before he left. The right back seemed shorter. For a while he followed to rear lights of the reporter's car until he saw them park outside a bar when they were the back of the paved street of Santa Teresa. He pulled up next to them and asked what the plan was. We are getting something to eat, said one of the reporters. Although he wasn't hungry, Fate agreed to come for a beer. One of the reporters, Chucho Flores, worked for a local paper and radio station. The other one, Ángel Martínez Mesa, who had rung the bell when they were at the ranch, worked for a Mexico City sports paper. Martínez Mesa was short and must have been around 50. Chucho Flores was only a little shorter than Fate. He was 35 and he was always smiling. The relationship between Flores and Martínez Mesa, Fate sensed, was that of grateful discipline and largely the indifferent master. And yet Martínez Mesa's indifference seemed less a matter of arrogance or any sense of superiority than of exhaustion, an exhaustion that showed even in his disheveled clothing, a stained suit and scuffed shoes, while his discipline wore a designer suit and designer tie and gold cuff links, and possibly saw himself as a man of style. As the Mexican ate grilled meat with fried potatoes, Fate thought about Garcia's tattoo. Then he compared the loneliness of the ranch to the loneliness of his mother's apartment. He thought about the ashes, which were still there. He thought about the dead neighbor. He thought about Barry Simmons' neighborhood, and everywhere is his memory aligned as the Mexican age seemed bleak. After they dropped Martinez Mesa off at the Sonora resort, Chucho Flores insisted on going out for a last drink. There were several reporters at the bar, among them a few Americans Fate would like it to talk to, but Chucho Flores had other plans. They went to a bar on a narrow street in the center of Santa Teresa, a bar with walls painted fluorescent colors and a zigzagging bar. They ordered whiskey and orange juice. The bartender knew Chucho Flores. The man looked more like the owner than a bartender, thought Fate. His movements were brusque and commanding, even when he began to dry glasses with the apron tied around his waist. And yet he wasn't very old, 25 at most, and Chucho Flores, who was busy talking to Fate about New York and reporting in New York, didn't pay him much attention. I'd like to go live there, confesses Chucho Flores, and work for some Hispanic radio station. There are lots of them, said Fate. I know, said Chucho Flores, and if he'd already done plenty of research. And then he mentioned the names of two stations that broadcast in Spanish, stations Fate had never heard of before. So, what's the name of your magazine? Asked Chucho Flores. Fate told him, and after thinking a while, Chucho Flores shook his head. I don't know it, he said. It is big. No, it isn't big, said Fate. It's Harlem Magazine. It's a Harlem magazine, if that means anything to you. No, said Chucho Flores, it doesn't. It's a magazine where the owners are African Americans and the editor is African American and almost all the reporters are African Americans, said Fate. Really? Asked Chucho Flores. Can you do objective reporting that way? It was then that Fate realized that Chucho Flores was a little drunk. He thought about what he just said. In fact, he didn't really have any basis to claim that almost all the reporters were black. He had seen only African American at the office, although, of course, he didn't know the correspondents. Maybe there was some Chicano in California, he thought, or maybe in Texas, but it also seemed likely that there was no one in Texas, because otherwise, why send him from Detroit and not give the job to the person in Texas or California? Some girls came up to say hello to Chucho Flores. They were dressed for a night out in high heels and club clothes. One of them had bleached blonde hair, and the other one was very dark, quieter and shy. The blonde said hello to the bartender, and he nodded back, as if he knew her well and didn't trust her. Chucho Flores introduced Fate as a famous sport writer from New York. Fate chose that moment to tell the Mexican that he wasn't really a sports reporter. He recovered political and social issues, which Chucho Flores found very interesting. After a while, another man showed up and was introduced by Chucho Flores as the biggest film buff south of the Arizona border. His name was Charlie Cruz, and with a big smile, he told Fate do not believe a word Chucho Flores had said. He owned a video store, and in his line of work, he had to watch a lot of movies, but that was all. I'm no expert, he said. How many stores do you have? Chucho Flores asked him. Go on, tell my friend Fate. 3, said Charlie Cruz. The dude is loaded, said Chucha Flores. The girl with bleaches blonde hair was Sara Mendes, and according to Chucha Flores, he has been his girlfriend. She had also been Charlie Cruz's girlfriend, and now she was dating the owner of a dance hall. That's Rosita, said Charlie Cruz. That's just the way she is. And what way is that? Faith asked. In not very good English, the girl answered that she liked to have fun. Life is short, she said. And then she was quiet, looking back and forth between Faith and Chucha Flores, as if reflecting on what she just said. Rosita is a little bit of philosopher too, said Charlie Cruz. Faith nodded his head. Two other girls came up to them. They were even younger and they knew only Chucha Flores and the bartender. Faith calculated that neither of them could be over 18. Charlie Cruz asked him if he liked Spike Lee. Yes, said Faith, although he didn't really. He seems Mexican, said Charlie Cruz. Maybe, said Faith. That's an interesting way to look at it. And what about Woody Allen? I like him, said Faith. He seems Mexican too, but Mexican from Mexico City or Cuernavaca, said Charlie Cruz. Mexican from Cancun, said Chucho Flores. Faith laughed, although he had no idea what they were talking about. He guesses they were making fun of him. What about Robert Rodriguez? I like him, said Faith. That shithead is one of ours, said Chucho Flores. I have a movie on video by Robert Rodriguez, said Charlie Cruz. A movie hardly anyone has ever seen. El Mariachi, asked Faith. No, everybody seen that one. An early one, from when Robert Rodriguez was a nobody. When he was just a piss poor Chicano motherfucker. A fuck up who took any gig he could get, said Charlie Cruz. Let's sit down and you can tell us the story, said Chucho Flores. Good idea, said Charlie Cruz. I was getting tired of standing. The story was simple and implausible. 2 years before he shot El Mariachi, Robert Rodriguez took a trip to Mexico. He spent a few days wandering along the Texas-Chihuahua border, and then he went south to Mexico City, where he spent his time drinking and getting high. He sank so low, said Charlie Cruz, that he will go into a pulqueria before noon and leave only when it was closing, and they kicked him out. In the end, he was living in a bordello or a brothel or a whorehouse where he got to be friends with a whore and her pimp, a guy who went by the name El Perno, which for a pimp was like being called the penis or the cock. This Perno guy hit it off with Robert Rodriguez and was a good friend to him. Sometimes he had to drag him up to the room where he slept. Other times he and the whore had to undress him and put him in the shower. Because Robert Rodriguez was always passing out. One morning, one of those rare mornings when the future movie director was half sober, the pimp told him he had some friends who wanted to make a movie and asked whether he could shoot it. Robert Rodriguez, as you might imagine, said sure thing. And El Perno took care of the practical details. The shooting lasted 3 days, it seems, and Robert Rodriguez was always drunk and high when he got behind the camera. Naturally, his name doesn't appear in the credits. The director is listed as Johnny Swingerson, which is obviously a joke. But if you know Robert Rodriguez movies, he was the way he frames a scene, his takes and overhead shots, his sense of speed. There is no doubt is his work. The only thing missing in his personal editing style is his personal editing style, which makes it clear the film was edited by someone else. But he's the director, that much I'm sure of. Fate wasn't interested in Robert Rodriguez or the story of his first film, Fears of Last. He could care less. And also he was starting to feel like eating some dinner or having some sandwich and then going to bed at the motel and getting some sleep. But still, he had to hear scraps of the plot. Story of whores who gave wise advice, or maybe they were just whores with hearts of gold. Especially a whore called Justina, who for reasons that escaped him but weren't too hard to figure out, was acquainted with some vampires in Mexico City who roamed at night disguised as policemen. He ignored the rest of the story, and as he and the dark-haired girl who had come with Rosita Mendez were kissing, he heard something about pyramids, Aztec vampires, and book writer in blood. But the inspiration from dusk till dawn, and the recurring nightmare of Robert Rodriguez, the girl with dark hair, didn't know how to kiss. Before he left, he gave Chucha Flores the phone number of the motel where he was staying, and then he stumbled out to where he had parked the car. As he was opening the car door, he heard someone ask if he felt all right. He took a deep breath and turned around. Chucho Flores was 10 feet away with the knot of his tie loosened and his arm around Rosa Mendez. Rosa was looking at Fate as if he were some kind of exotic specimen. What kind, he didn't know, but he didn't like the look in her eye. "I'm fine," he said. "There's no problem. Do you want me to drive you to your motel?" asked Chucho Flores. Rosa Mendez smiled more broadly. It occurred to him that Chucho Flores might be gay. "No need," he said. I can handle it." Chucho Flores let go of Rosa Mendez and took a step in his direction. Fate got into the car and started to engine, looking away from them. "Goodbye, amigo," he heard the Mexican say. His voice somehow muted. Rosa Mendez and on her hands, on her hips, and was struck him as a completely artificial pose, and she wasn't looking at him or his car as she drove away, but at her companion, who stood motionless, as if the night air had frozen him. There was a new kid at front desk of the motel, and Fate asked him whether he could get something to eat. The boy said they didn't have a kitchen, but he could buy cookies or a candy bar from the machine out front. Outside, trucks passed by now and then, heading north and south, and across the road were the lights of the service station. Fate headed the way. When he saw crossing the road, a car almost hit him. For a moment he thought it was because he was drunk, but then he told himself that before he crossed, drunk or not, he had looked both ways, and he hadn't seen any lights on the road. So where had the car come? So where had the car come from? The service station was brightly lit and almost empty. Behind the counter, a 15 years old girl was reading a magazine. It looked to Fate as if she had a very small head. Next to the register was a woman, maybe 20 years old, who watched him as he went over to a machine that sold hot dogs. "You have to pay first," said the woman in Spanish. "I don't understand," said Fate. "I'm American." The woman repeated that what she had said in English. "2 hot dogs and a beer," said Fate. The woman took a pen out of the pocket of her uniform and wrote down the amount of money Fate had to give her. "Dollar or pesos?" asked Fate. "Pesos," said the woman. Fate left some money next to the cash register and went to get a beer out of the refrigerator case, and then he held up two fingers to show the small-head teenager how many hot dogs he wanted. The girl brought him the hot dogs, and Fate asked her how the condiment machine worked. "Push the button for the one you want," said the teenager in English. Fate put ketchup, mustard, and something that looked like guacamole on one of the hot dogs and ate it right there. "Nice," he said. "Good," said the girl. Then he repeated the operation with the other hot dog and went to the register to get his change. He took some coins and went back over to where the teenager was and tipped her. "Gracias, señorita," he said in Spanish. Then he went out with his beer and hot dog. As he waited by the highway for three trucks to go by on their way to Santa Teresa to Arizona, he remembered what he'd said to the cashier. "I'm American. Why didn't I say I was African American?" "Because I'm in a foreign country. But can I really consider myself to be in a foreign country when I could go walking back to my own country right now if I wanted, and it wouldn't even take very long? Doesn't this mean that in some places I'm American, and in some places I'm African American, and in other places, by logical extension, I'm nobody?" When he got up, he called the editor of the sports section at the magazine and told him Pickett wasn't in Santa Teresa. "That's no surprise," said the editor of the sports section. "He's probably at some ranch outside Vegas." "So how the hell am I supposed to interview him?" asked Fate. "You want me to go to Vegas? Interview? You don't need any fucking interview. All we need is somebody to cover the fight, the atmosphere, the mood in the ring, the shape Pickett's in, the impression he makes to the Mexicans." "The mise-en-scene," said Fate. "Miss what?" asked the editor of the sports section. Shit, man, the atmosphere, said Faith. In plain in plain English, said the editor of the sports section, like you're telling a story at a bar and all your friends are there and people are gathered around to listen to what you have to say. I hear you, said Faith. I will get I will get to you the day after tomorrow. If there's anything you don't understand, don't worry about it. We will edit it here so it sounds like you spend your whole life ringside. All right, I hear you, said Faith.